Hello friends, this video on how do organisms reproduce part 21 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. There can be another scenario. So this was the scenario when the ovary releases one egg, that is ovulation takes place, and within 24 hours a sperm comes and enters into the ovum and fertilization takes place. So that is the scenario which we had discussed now. Now, what would happen if the egg is not fertilized? Let us suppose the ovary released one mature egg. So, one matured egg will come into the fallopian tube. But let us suppose that unfortunately, there is no sperm who actually meets this ovum in 24 hours, because we know that lifespan of an unfertilized egg is only 24 hours. So if fertilization has to take place, then a sperm should enter inside the ovum within those 24 hours. Now what happens if this doesn't happen? So in that case, what will happen to the egg? So in that case, what happens? Let's see. So we already saw that an egg is released from either of the ovaries every 28 days. So every 28 days, there is one egg which is released. Okay. We also know that this unfertilized egg will remain alive only for 24 hours after ovulation. That means it needs to be fertilized by the sperm within 24 hours. Now let us suppose that the sperm did not fertilize it within 24 hours. So what will happen? Now forget about the fact whether the sperm fertilized it or not. Now as soon as this ovulation takes place, as soon as a matured egg is released from the ovary, what happens to the uterus? Now the uterus gets to know that okay, the egg is released from the ovary. So the uterus also plans itself. The uterus also prepares itself. Uterus also knows that now the egg has been released, so the egg will remain alive for 24 hours. So maybe a sperm will come and it will fertilize the egg. So if a sperm fertilizes the egg, then what will happen? A zygote will be formed. If a zygote is formed, then what will happen? In 4 to 5 days, the zygote will become an embryo, and that embryo will come to the uterus. So uterus should also prepare itself so that it can receive the embryo, right? Because once the embryo comes to the uterus, it is going to stay in the uterus for 9 months. So the uterus also does some preparations to receive the fetus. So what kind of preparation does it do? Now there is an inner lining of the uterus. So if you look at this picture, the orange colored structure here is the inner lining of the uterus. So this inner lining of the uterus is known as endometrium. So this is the inner lining of uterus. So this inner lining thickens. Thickens means now the uterus knows that once the fetus comes inside me, it is going to stay here for 9 months. So I need to take proper care of that fetus. So how do I need to take proper care? By giving it full protection, by giving it full nutrition, right? And for all those things, what it does, the inner lining of the uterus thickens, because if it thickens, it will give a cushiony feeling to the baby. At the same time, it gets richly supplied with blood, because blood of the mother's body contain all the nutrients, so that that blood can give the nutrients to that embryo, so that the embryo can further help the embryo to grow in a nice way. So this is the preparation which is done by the uterus. But now let us suppose that no fertilization takes place. Let us suppose that even though this egg was released by the ovary, but there was no sperm who could actually fuse it or who could actually fertilize it within 24 hours. So in that case, no fertilization took place. Now if no fertilization took place, that means no zygote is formed, because no fertilization had taken place. Now what will happen to the egg? The egg will degenerate itself. So the egg will vanish. Now what happens to the uterus? Uterus did so much of preparation. The uterus thickened its endometrium, which is now fully vascular, that means which is fully supplied with blood vessels. Now what will happen to that endometrium? Now this thick endometrium is of no use, right? So now what will happen? The endometrium will break. So this thickness of the endometrium will break off. So when it breaks, what happens? It was made up of blood. The thickness was due to the more supply of blood. Now when it breaks, this blood has to flow somewhere. So where will it flow? It has to go outside the body, because that blood is useless now. Because if it doesn't break, what will happen? Again, after 28 days, a new egg will be released. So again, that time the uterus will thicken the endometrium all the more. So that means the endometrium keep on becoming thick. So much of blood will get accumulated on the inner wall of the uterus. So there will be hardly any space left for the baby, right? So that is why as soon as the uterus get to know that no fertilization had taken place and no fetus is going to come to me, the endometrium breaks, and the blood which was actually making it thick, that blood will be thrown out through the vagina. So it is excreted in the form of bleeding through vagina. So this bleeding, which happens every month, is known as menstruation, and this is what we call as the menstrual cycle, because every 28 days a new egg is released by the ovary, and this menstruation also happens every 28 days. So we will look at the calculation of dates in the next slide. So for now you understood why this bleeding happens every month. That's because every month when an egg is released by the ovary, it waits for 24 hours for a sperm. So during that time, the uterus also prepares itself in order to receive the fetus. So how it prepares itself? By thickening its endometrium. Now when no fertilization happens, then no zygote is formed, so no fetus comes to the uterus. So this thickened endometrium becomes a waste. So the endometrium breaks and it comes out of the body in the form of bleeding through the vagina, and this results in this process of menstruation. So let us now talk about the sexual cycle in female. So sexual cycle in female is nothing but the menstrual cycle which happens every month. Approximately at an interval of some 28 days. So monthly once every female undergoes this menstrual cycle wherein there is bleeding from her vagina for some 3 to 5 days. So it is the process of bleeding through vagina due to breakage of endometrium. This process is known as menstruation. So now you understand that when I say that as soon as a female reaches the age of puberty, as soon as she reaches adolescence, the menstrual cycle starts. So menstrual cycle starts means your body tells you that when will the menstrual cycle starts? Only after ovulation. If an egg has been released by the ovary, only after that menstruation will happen, because they are related. When an egg gets released from the ovary, then the uterus prepares itself, then the uterus will wait for some time for the fetus to come. When the fetus doesn't come, then the wall of the uterus will break and menstruation will take place. So that means when the menstruation happens for the first time for a girl, then it is an indication to the girl that now your reproductive organs have matured. Your ovary have got matured eggs now, and that is what the first matured egg has been released from your ovary. So that is the indication. When a girl has the first menstruation, it means the first matured egg from your ovary has been released. Now once the first matured egg has been released, that means every 28 days a new matured egg will be released from the ovary. Right? So that is the concept of menstruation. Now this occurs every 28 days. Now as I said, since ovulation occurs every 28 days, that is why menstruation also occurs every 28 days. Now how is the date of ovulation related to the date of menstruation? We will look at that now. Let us now see how is the date of ovulation and the date of menstruation related to each other. So this menstrual cycle generally lasts for 2 to 6 days. For some female it lasts for 3 days, for somebody it lasts for 5 days, but it ranges in this 2 to 6 days. It occurs around 14 days post ovulation. That means the time when ovulation takes place. After 14 days of that, this menstruation happens. So let us see how are the time of ovulation and the time of menstruation related to each other. Now let us suppose ovulation takes place. Now what happens when ovulation takes place? A matured egg is released from the ovary. So this egg is released into the fallopian tube. Now there are two possibilities that can happen. One possibility is that the egg gets fertilized. That means a sperm comes and fertilizes the egg within 24 hours, because that egg will be alive for 24 hours. Now what will happen if the egg gets fertilized? Zygote will be formed. After that, what will happen? In another 4 to 5 days, the zygote will undergo repeated divisions by which it will form an embryo, and this embryo will descend into the uterus. So in a period of 5 to 6 days, it will descend into the uterus, and then gradually a placenta will be formed, and then the embryo will gradually get converted into a fetus. Right? So that is the process when the egg gets fertilized. Now let us suppose that if no fertilization happens, in that case, what will happen? Now when no fertilization is happened, what happens to the uterus? The uterus is waiting. Uterus is waiting for what? It is waiting for the embryo, because in this case, how much time after, when the fertilization took place, after that in 5 to 6 days, the uterus received the embryo. So here also the uterus first waits, because anyways from the date of ovulation it takes some 5 to 6 days for the embryo to reach the uterus. So the uterus is waiting. Now even after 5 to 6 days, the uterus doesn't get the embryo. So the uterus thinks that, okay, maybe I'll get it tomorrow. So he waits. So the uterus waits for some more time. So finally it is seen that the uterus waits for around 14 days. Now when till 14th day also the uterus doesn't receive a fetus, then what happens? The endometrium breaks. So bleeding happens, and that is known as menstruation. So that is how this menstruation happens 14 days after the date of ovulation. Right? So because whenever the ovulation takes place, if fertilization takes place, then the uterus gets the embryo in 5 to 6 days. And if fertilization doesn't take place, the uterus waits for the embryo for 14 days. If it doesn't get any embryos till 14th day, then it breaks the wall of the endometrium and the bleeding takes place through the vagina, and that is known as menstruation. So I hope that this concept of menstrual cycle is clear to you now, that why menstruation happens. Okay, let us now talk about a small term called menopause. Now, does that mean that this process of reproduction can happen anytime in life? As I said, the process of reproduction will start only at a certain age. So for guys, that age is around 13 to 14 years. For girls, that age is around 11 to 13 years. So that reproduction process is possible only for people who have attained puberty. Now, what is the maximum limit for reproduction? Can an old man of 80 years old and a woman of 75 years old, can they both reproduce? Let us see what happens. Now, menstrual cycle in a woman continues till 45 to 55 years of age, post which ovary becomes dormant. That means the ovary of any female will remain active only till 55 years of age. That means a woman's ovary becomes active. When will the ovary starts producing mature eggs? When the woman is in the teenage, maybe around 13 years old. And the ovary will be active till the woman is 45 to 55 years of age. After that, the ovary is not going to produce any eggs. So that means only this much duration is the time period when the woman is capable of reproduction. After that, once menstruation stops, now once the ovary stops producing eggs, that means no ovulation will take place. Now once the eggs are not produced, that means no menstruation will take place, because only when the eggs are produced, the uterus thickens its wall. So when no eggs will be produced, there will be no thickening of the uterus wall, there will be no menstruation. So the female will no more be capable of reproducing. So this will denote, so this stopping of the menstrual cycle is known as menopause. Pause means stop. So this is known as menopause. Now, once menopause occurs for a woman, that woman becomes incapable of reproduction. So that denotes the end of reproductive cycle for that female. Right? So with this, I think I have reached towards the end of sexual reproduction in human beings, and I hope that I have been able to explain you how reproduction occurs in human beings, what are the different sexual cycles that happen in a female. Thank you. Please visit www.examfear.com to watch more videos, attempt free online test, get free study material, find tutors and mentors. Thank you once again.